Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Feel free to continue to grab your lunch and drinks and whatever you might need to do. We're just going to get started. I just want a couple housekeeping reminders that masks are optional in this space. If you go upstairs for medical practices, you need to have them on, but in here they are optional. Feel free to wear one if you feel more comfortable. Also, there's recycle in the back. So for your water bottles, if you could please remember to place those in the recycle, that would be great. All right, I think we're ready. I'd first like to extend a special thank you to our lunch sponsor today, Grenaz and Bubbly Hall. Bubbly Hall is a new project underway on Central College Road, and the food hall will open later this year with 15,000 square feet of retail, food, and event space. Bubbly Hall gathers flavors from around the globe, presenting them in a one-stop shop for an astounding culinary experience. So thank you, Bubbly Hall, for your support of Healthy New Albany in our community. Also, thank you for our team today. It was a bit of a crazy morning and a crazy few weeks. We have some people sick on staff not feeling well. They did an awesome job pulling this all together. So thank you as always to the HNA staff for making this so special. Today we're taking the time to talk about our mental health. Our mental health is inexorably tied to our overall well-being. It is the lens through which we see the world. The last 2 years, 2 to 3 years, have been trying, and I think for many of us, the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted us and our families in ways that we don't even understand. The importance of contemplating and caring for our mental health is extremely important. With our expert panel today, we'll take the opportunity to discuss the current new normal of mental health needs for adults and children and what will be required to meet these needs in the future. First, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Whitney Raglin Bignall is a pediatric primary care psychologist. Can you give us a wave, Dr. Bignall, so we know who you are? Thank you. At Nationwide Children's Hospital in Linden Pediatric Primary Care Center. She's also an assistant professor of pediatrics in the Division of Psychology and Neuropsychology at The Ohio State University College of Medicine. As a pediatric integrative behavioral health psychologist, her clinical work and research over the past several years have focused primarily on promoting equitable and evidence-based health and mental health treatment within health disparate and ethnic minority communities. Thank you so much for being here today. Our next panelist is Dr. Christine Koterba. She's a pediatric neuropsychologist at Nationwide Children's Hospital and a clinical assistant professor of pediatrics at The Ohio State University. She is the attending neuropsychologist on the Nationwide Children's Inpatient Rehab Unit and is involved in the pre- and postdoctoral neuropsychological training programs. Her research interests include psychological and neuropsychological outcomes in pediatric traumatic and acquired brain injury. Thank you for being here today. Dr. Ken Yeager is a clinical professor in the College of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. He also serves as director of the Stress, Trauma, and Resilience Program, which is the STAR program, many of you may know, at The Ohio State University's Webster Medical Center. The STAR program recognizes the importance of addressing experiences of trauma with evidence-based, trauma-informed practices and approaches to care. Within the STAR program, Dr. Yeager has developed the Ohio State University Medical Center Trauma Recovery Center, which provides psychological and psychiatric care for victims of violent crime. Dr. Yeager holds an endowed professorship as the David E. Scholler Professor for Patient Compassion and has numerous publications in the areas of crisis intervention, resilience building, treating comorbid substance abuse, and mental illness. He is a member of Oxford Bibliography's online editorial board and a treating clinician for the National Football League Program for Substance Abuse. Thank you, Dr. Yeager, for being here. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to hand over the microphone to Dr. Yeager. We're going to start with the presentation. And just as a note for the audience and the panelists as well, there's a lot of material to cover, but if there are questions or if you all want to jump in with comments or content of any sort, please feel free. This is very much a conversation and we're going to engage and discuss. So with that, Dr. Yeager.
Okay. Hi. Thanks, Angela. Thank you to you and the team for such a wonderful opportunity today. Thanks for having us all here. And I'm going to try not to ramble too much. And anybody that has ever been around me knows I can't sit still and talk. It's impossible for me. It's never been anything I've been able to do. So I'm just trying to get off the longer around a little bit. But let me ask you a question. How often have you been bothered by feeling down or depressed in the past 5 months? Now, let me change that question to how often have you felt down and depressed in the last 2.5 years? Yeah, it's a little different, I think. And how often have you been bothered by feeling anxious or fearful in the past 5 months? And then let's also morph that for the last 2.5 years to see what happens with that. So we live a very difficult time. There are factors that are going on all around us that are kind of beating us up. We're getting inundated with information that is traumatizing. The economics of the world are difficult right now, and we've had this little thing called pandemic, in which in my work at the Western Medical Center has been extremely challenging. And it's really changed everything that we are doing. The situations that we used to take for granted, we can't take for granted anymore. And civilization seems a lot less civil. And a lot of what we're seeing has really challenged our just belief that, work hard, we do good things will happen to us. And when we see things coming in on our television feed, on our social media, they challenge that because to make us think that the world's not quite a safe place, and that there is a stigmatized mental illness system, very much so exists in the world. And it's really challenging because right now there are a lot of contributing factors. How many of you thought that once we got through 2019, things are going to get better? How many of you thought when 2021 came rolling around that things would get better, right? And then we all kind of got blindsided by things that are going on. So kind of a look at current reality. Significant stressors. So the American Psychiatric Association did the 2022 stress American survey, and COVID, basically the second anniversary. Percentage that says it's a significant source of stress, 87%. 81% talking about supply chain issues. I'm building a house right now. Anybody who's building a house, if you've got garage doors, my hat's off to you. We ordered them 2 years ago. They're still never very found. I don't know if you see them, please send them my way. There's a lot of global uncertainty right now. There's a fear of retaliation for cyber attacks, potential war. I don't know about you, but I'm old enough that we had to stop and get under our desks when I was in elementary school. And you don't forget that. And I remember them telling us to line up in the hallway in alphabetical order. So, body identification is easier that way. That's scary to think about that. That's why they did that. So things are really difficult. And we worry about the crisis, and I worry about the people who are seeing this, and it's more vivid than ever before. And if you're seeing it on social media, it's even more vivid than that. So the numbers are overwhelming. We're worried about inflation, we're worried about the beginning of World War III. As a society, that's not all that's going on. Significant stressors for money. The numbers keep going up as far as the level of concern about how are we making ends meet. Anybody fill up your car this week? $75 to fill my truck up. I just about needed cardiac arrest. Worried about the economy. And the interesting thing, yep. Oh. Yep. How about I just do this? Yeah. So the interesting thing is that the 18 to 25-year-old group and the 26 to 43-year-old group are more impacted by this, right? And you think about folks thinking, am I ever going to be able to buy my first home? Am I going to be able to get that car? Am I going to be able to pay my bills? Can I get what I need to get with the money that I have coming in? It's tough. And it keeps growing. And many people say that the pandemic has changed their lives forever. No graduation parties. My daughter canceled her wedding twice. We finally got it in. Well, anyways. Most of us are worried that the pandemic will never end, right? Will it ever end? Yeah, I think it's going to be with us. I think it's going to be around. The good news is getting better at prioritizing things, getting the things done that are important for us. So there is a little bit of silver lining in there. And about kids, my granddaughter is 2, and she was scared and is still working through being scared, seeing people without masks. Yeah, because her entire life so far, everybody's had this blue patch on their face. And her little 2-year-old brain is having trouble wrapping her hands and her mind around what it means not to see that. So these are all the things that are going on. We worry about social development, academic development, emotional health development. That's why we have these wonderful folks for children's here who can talk to that and kind of think about what's going on with that. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, I'll let you start.
Well, I think children, anytime we have change, it's difficult. But there's been so many levels of change and a lot of uncertainty. And you start to see that in their ability to focus, their ability to regulate their emotions, making friends, isolation, certain things that we know are helpful in our mental health has been really strained through the pandemic. And so we are constantly seeing those effects day in and day out. And the numbers of the people who need help are everlastingly growing.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we're seeing too is the impact of changes in school and what that's looked like for kids as well. And there is research coming out that shows certain groups of kids who are at higher risk for having more adverse effects due to kind of the shift between virtual school and in person. So even though, most schools are back full-time in person now, the effects of kind of that 1.5 years when things were virtual, I think we're going to be feeling those for a long time.
Yeah, it is enormous. Imagine what it's like to be isolated as a child, and what impact that might have on well-being, what impact that might have on your ability to cope, and what it is that can be done, and what advice would you have for folks about what to do and how to help their kids, their grandchildren to cope with those?
I think the biggest thing, and you were both of you kind of alluded to this, is that finding that sense of predictability and being able to put that back into a child's life. Because I think that's been something that's really been missing. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they had so many quarantines on and off for 2 months that my 4-year-old every day is like, this is a stay-home day. Do I have to go to school today? And that unpredictability, I think, is just so hard for kids. But I think that as parents and caregivers and grandparents, that's something that we can do. We can have a routine for our kids, have things very structured, give them back some of that predictability that they don't have in the world around them right now.
And I would say talk to them. Get an idea of what they're feeling, help them in words to express those emotions. Because sometimes they're not really sure what they're feeling something. And I think it's important to talk about sometimes how things are hard and what they can do when they feel those emotions coming up and how they can problem solve with you to come up with some solutions on how to cope with maybe how they're feeling.
It's fascinating. I don't know how I'm feeling half the time, so we expect our children to. Wow. Yeah. We think about the impact. It's vicarious trauma. We may not be there. We may not be directly impacted by it because we're not first-hand experiencing it, but it still impacts us. It doesn't go away. Traumatic stress is elevated stress levels that go along for a long period of time. And certainly this idea of moral distress. There aren't any really good solutions out there, so it makes it really difficult to understand what's the next right thing to do or where's the next right thing to go. So when we have this uncertainty and traumatic experiences, we become a little more hypervigilant. The world's a little less safe of a place to be. We try to avoid things that are uncomfortable. I don't know about you, I avoided the grocery store for the longest time. Thank goodness for pickup at the store. I didn't care about the line. I was in my car, the doors were locked, I was safe, it was good, right? Then there's becoming control. We have to try to control what's going on around us. And if we can't control it, it's hard to know who or what to trust. And if we don't know who or what to trust, then we begin to shut down and we lose intimacy. And that's when folks get into trouble, is when they can't share what's going on with them. They don't know what they're feeling and they can't share it and they don't know who to talk to. And these are the things that we're experiencing. Fear, anxiety, sadness, feeling helpless and unsafe has been the general consensus of what's been going on. So how real is this? So the Census Bureau and the National Center for Healthcare Statistics partnered to take a look at anxiety and depression in the United States. And typically it ranges between 12 and 17% nationally. And recently, with the survey, it was as high as 48% in Mississippi of people experiencing depression, anxiety, or both. Yes, sir.
Have those numbers gone up in the last 10 years? Go back 10 years.
Yeah.
There's been a big swing in that.
The big swing has been in the last 2.5 years. For 10 years previously, the numbers had stayed relatively stagnant between 12 and 17%. It wasn't until the beginning of the pandemic that we saw the swing. And the swing has jumped up as high as 43% in the highest area. Ohio, we're kind of in the middle. We're at a third of the population feeling that way. Is it coincident that Hawaii is one of the lowest states with stress? Yeah. We should all relocate, right? A little less gray, a little more sun. That would be a good thing. And, so what are the sources of some of these things? A sense of concern regarding perceptions, witness others acting in ways that were opposed to COVID protocols, being concerned about your safety given the behaviors of others, heard others' conversations that are negative or threatening to certain groups is discerning. Having been asked questions that you didn't realize was set up to express their viewpoint. Having experienced indirect conversation and or direct confrontation in certain situations, struggling to understand the basis of certain viewpoints, found it difficult to know how to respond, being surprised by perceptions expressed by others. Getting away from social media is a big trend that we're seeing right now. Just saying I don't have time for it. Unfriended or ghosting certain individuals, avoiding certain people's places and things, trying to build a formula to respond to difficult situations, and trying to understand what the next right thing is. So here's where the problem comes in. How many of you talk to yourself? I'm in psychiatry. Careful, they're psychologists. Okay, so thank you for answering honestly. How many of you answer yourself? Yeah, okay. How many of you argue with yourself? And how many of you lose arguments with yourself? Well, that's the hard one, right? I'm going to be good today. Oh, was that a Dairy Queen? It happens. It happens. But what we want to be worried about is the negative self-talk. Something happens and you say something to yourself. And there's a negative consequence of that. Oftentimes it's the afterthought that says I should have, or if I don't, it's all my fault. And I want you to make me a promise, and that promise is I shall not should on myself anymore, because it's how we talk to ourselves has an impact on food. So please be careful how you talk to yourself or say to yourself. It's really, really, really important in making a difference. So now that I've totally depressed you, and I'm very sorry about that, I did not mean to do that. Let's talk about what we can do. So January 22nd of 2017, I was out working on a project, and I noticed on the retaining wall by my house this little flower. It had been like 20 degrees the night before, but it was one of those really warm January days. Nobody told us that the flower couldn't bloom. And this flower bloomed, and that to me kind of, it's like, oh, that's what resilience is. This flower should not be blooming in the middle of January. And I was so happy to see it there. It was just so amazing to me. And then I went out for a walk with my wife in Bryce Canyon. We took the 2-mile trail and somehow took the wrong turn and ended up on the 5-mile trail at the bottom. The worst part of realizing you're at the bottom of Bryce Canyon. Gotta walk back out, right? But at the bottom of the canyon, we found this tree growing out of a rock in a crack in the rock. You can't really tell here, but it's probably a 5-story tree, straight up towards the sun. So it really reminds me that, you know, it's seeking alternative responses to the challenges we face. It works against the biological forces that teaches us to see the negative and respond to it. And it'll change the way we think about ourselves. We think resiliently. So it's a series of choices. We move through pain. We pursue purposes larger than ourselves, outside of ourselves, to help others, and to reach out in supportive ways to all the people around us, being professional, being kind. We find over time that you become wiser, kinder, more thoughtful, helpful, and thankful for your choices. That's how you become resilient. It's the things that you do. So I encourage you to look at 3 good things every day. You can do this, 3 good things every day. And after you do that for a couple of weeks, keep track of the 3 good things and add doing 1 good thing for somebody else. My favorite thing is, and I heard this on NPR, I can't take credit for it, is when I stop at Starbucks in the morning, I buy the car's coffee behind me. And it's worked really well, except for the time the person behind me, I didn't ask what their order was. They ordered 3 of those gallon jugs of at 67 bucks. It's okay. A lot of people had a good day that day, right? So it's okay. It's exponential goodness. There's a lot of tension, so be aware of that your response to difficult work is not how you are, and think about how you respond to that difficult work and separate yourself from the challenges that you face, and don't assign the challenges to your personal attributes. It's just a lot of what we do is difficult these days. Trying to turn the computer on after times is difficult. To get it to work, it's difficult. To get my phone to work, it's difficult. It's not my fault, I'm not stupid. Well, I don't know. Jury's still out on that one. Let's see. So practice mindfulness, be non-judgmental. Accepting, looking for the possible, what's out there, what can I do? What's the next interesting thing for me to explore? And ask yourself, who or what's taking your energy? Because we all compete for energy. Some people give you energy, some people take your energy. So how do you build energy? And is there a better way to approach this? What's the best use of my energy? And when you see people who are doing things right, steal that attribute. Put it into your own life. You see somebody who you respect doing something wonderful, Jack Rupp back there, utmost respect for Jack and the things that he does in New Albany, Plain Township Fire. I will take any wonderful attribute that I see. Try my best. Clear your mind of clutter. Please turn off your television. Your brain can always develop, but only if you're engaging in creative things. You know, paint, garden, walk, be with nature. Get out there and do the things. And remember, the most important relationship is the one you have with yourself and the one that you have with family. The single most important relationship. And when we think about the future, it's a good idea to think about where we're going. What is it that I want to do in the next 5 years? How am I going to get there? What's the next best thing for me to think about? And then think about the next 10 years and come up with your audacious list of things you want to do. I want to run the Boston Marathon. This is not mine. This is not mine. Does this body look like it can run a marathon? Buy a house at the beach. That I can do. You know, be a contestant on Wheel of Fortune or The Price is Right, something like that. Be a content area expert in something for the academic world. You know, and ask yourself, how can I do this? What's the next best thing for me to do to get this accomplished? What are the 3 best reasons to do it? How to go about it? And why do I want to do it? And then set out on that path. Take that journey. If we think about it, a quick exercise for you to learn about yourself would be to write positive life attributes on the top of the line and negative on the bottom. And then ask yourself some questions. What happened, which you've already written down? How did I respond? And how would I like to have responded? And what you see is that over your life's period of time, you develop patterns of responding to things. And it's the patterns of responding to difficult things that oftentimes are what hold us back in life. So if you can identify what that pattern is, you can do something different in the future. So think about how you can do things differently. We bet the enemy in is us. We're really the only thing standing in the way of our own change, because the only thing that changes ourselves. So choose how you're going to respond to a situation. Understand our decisions are what they are. Take time to write about and think about how we can respond differently. And what are the patterns and how can I change the patterns to make my interactions better? Right? So the next time that telemarketer calls, you feel like I'm loading on them, think, is there a better way to do this? You know, is there a quicker, better way around this? And, you know, so in summary, it's really difficult. It's really tough. It's really a hard place to be. So I have two other wonderful people here. I am going to shut up and sit down and let them talk. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yeager. I guess before we kind of open up the panel for more discussion, does anybody have any quick questions they wanted to jump in with? If not, I would just offer Dr. Koterba or Dr. Raglin Bignall, is there anything that you would just want to kind of jump in following the presentation and emphasize or say as follow-up?
Yeah, you know, I think what's really interesting in hearing you talk, it makes me think of what I see already developing in my two young kids. And this negative self-talk starts really, really early. My 4-year-old is already doing it, and it's really distressing when I hear him say negative things about himself. And that knee-jerk reaction is to say, no, you're not horrible, you're great, you're wonderful. And what I have found to be helpful is to start teaching him these same strategies you're talking about. So, you know, when I hear him saying those things, now saying that we do is we have to say good things about ourselves, and we have to say good things about the person we're talking to. And I was tucking him in last night, and we were doing this. We said, my husband was downstairs. We said, let's call daddy and let's say some good things about daddy. And so, you know, I like that you can validate how somebody else is feeling and say, I hear what you're saying and you feel that way, but let's kind of challenge that and think of some really good things, maybe about yourself or some really good things that happened today. You know, so that focus is shifting more to that positive aspect where, you know, like Dr. Yeager is saying, to kind of change that pattern of thinking to focus more on the positive and the good rather than kind of dwelling on the bad or the negative things that are happening.
And I like that you're making it a routine. I think when you make it a routine, it becomes more of a habit. In our family, every Friday night with my in-laws, we call each other and we ask each other for our weekly catch. And the weekly catch is something positive, a blessing we had. And many times we had a rough week, we're all sitting there going, hold on, I know we had a good thing happen. And I love it because then I end the week knowing that I'm thinking about this positive thing that happened. And it also brings us together. And I think it's when you make it a routine, it's more helpful.
You have so many interesting things to share, both of you ladies, after speaking with you. Could you, each of you, maybe let's start with you, Dr. Ragland Bignall, just about the work you're doing in primary care and the unique thing that you're bringing to that.
Great. So I'm integrated, which means like I actually work every single day in the primary care office, and I picked that location to do my work because all kids typically have to go to their pediatrician for a set number of visits, right? There's well child visits, and I think there is stigma still around mental health, and so it's really nice to be in a place where I know families come, and we can talk about a whole host of things. So we can talk about potty training, we can talk about tantrum, we can talk about why no one's sleeping and some strategies for that. But then as they get to know me and I get to know them, then when other things happen, such as school difficulties or deaths in the family or different kinds of trauma, we have a relationship, and it's so much easier to get them to open up and to develop a relationship. And so my work every day is building relationships with each patient and their family as they're coming in there, but I also work in the Linden primary care office, which is in the neighborhood. And what I love about that is that I'm getting to learn the neighborhood and helping them to build trust. So a lot of my work also is thinking about how not to just see them individually in the office, but what forward-facing community-facing things we can develop as our team to help with those resources that I know a lot of our families are struggling to get, to normalize asking for help and being able to actually provide them. So now they're not just telling them the things they need, but helping them find those resources and where they are in the community, and then build bonds, because sometimes that social isolation is so hard. And so sometimes parents feel like they're the only one 2-year-old is tantruming all the time, which we know isn't true. And sometimes it's really good to hear and talk to other parents. And so a lot of my work is about how to build real bridges with our patients and the community.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about meeting the community where they are, and what does that mean to you, and how do you do that?
Well, it's, I try to make sure that, one, I know what they like, how they talk. I want to make sure that I'm not talking down to them. I want to be a part of them. That means that when a school is having a resource fair, I'm down there with our team and we're talking about lots of different things and trying to make health accessible to them in the words that we use and how we explain it, and talking about the real things that are happening in the community. Sometimes, yes, I'm a researcher and I want to study certain things, but sometimes that might not be what they want to talk about. And so sometimes it's asking them, what is your priority? And then helping them meet those needs with some of the resources that I have. So the resources that they are, the problems that they've identified, we work together. And that's where it's meeting them where they are.
And some of the things you have noticed in your practice are in some ways related to COVID, kids being home in virtual school. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and what you're seeing in the kids?
Yeah, some of our kids had a lot of difficulties at the beginning with internet. Like the schools are doing a really good job trying to get families Chromebooks home. But then you have a big family and you only have a couple computers. And so they're trying to decide which kid gets to be on the computer now. A lot of my parents are like, I don't know how to help my child. They're doing math different. And this is frustrating. And the kid doesn't want to be on the computer. They don't like it anymore. And so now this parent is trying to work and trying to teach their kid math, and there's this constant struggle. And sometimes, parents are just fed up and they're like, I don't care anymore, I don't want to do it. And so sometimes it's trying to get the whole family motivated to do something that they didn't really think or was expected to doing. Or sometimes, some of our kids have learning challenges, or they have ADHD, or they have something that makes learning even harder. And now the parent who's not skilled in doing this is trying to help them. And so I think there's a lot of frustration. The parent is trying to nag their child over and over again to look at the screen, and their relationship is getting kind of strained. And so how can we build their relationship back and their outcomes, their family life and having fun? Those are some of the things that we've seen. And some of our families are really stressed. And when you're a stressed out parent, sometimes it's hard to be patient, right? It's hard to talk calmly and give the instruction clearly when you just want them to do it for the first time. And so sometimes it's talking about how can all of us in the family manage our stress so we can be kind to each other? Because usually, sometimes we can be kind to other people, but the people in the house see the realest of us. And so sometimes it's talking about how we can be kind even when we feel stressed. How do we fill up our cups when everyone is draining it when it feels that way?
We have a question that came through the chat. Let's see if I can navigate this. Any advice for a college-age child that stayed home for almost 2 years in high school due to COVID and an accident? She feels anxiety now at college away from home and adjusting with the challenging schoolwork. Hold on, I have to scroll down. Any advice for the ages 18 to 22-year-old group? Anyone?
Well, I actually see quite a few of that age, because transitioning to college, I think, is hard in general. But when you haven't had a network in a while and you're doing a lot of new things, it can be really difficult. And so sometimes I talk about, there are counseling centers sometimes on campuses. And so sometimes I think it is really helpful to reach out to talk to counselors and advisors to get other support. But I also think that sometimes it's learning how to make friends. A lot of times people have been isolated, and so I really want them to identify, what do you like to do? Let's find you some people who like doing those things. How can you get commonality around those things? And the thing about anxiety is that the more we avoid connecting, the more that we don't do things, we get more and more anxious. And so I talk about, how can we start facing fears a little bit, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone just a little bit, just to get some success. it's a practice, because the more we just push ourselves out just a little bit more, the more comfortable we get. And I think that's gonna help a lot. So I don't want college students staying in their rooms and isolating, because that's not gonna actually help our anxiety. And so how can we find a small thing to get you out of the house and connecting with other people?
I think the other thing too is kind of figuring out, breaking down what is causing the stress. So, I think when you're stressed or anxious, it just feels like very overwhelming. Everything is stressful. But just like Whitney was saying, there's different things you can kind of tackle. So that social stressor piece is one thing. Another could be the academic piece. So, this question or this person was asking about the workload being harder, the classes being harder. So maybe working with the teen, young adult to explore that a little bit more. So, I think if you're a very high achieving high school student, you're going to go off to college and register for the max number of credits, right? Maybe just taking the minimum number of credits that you need to take, and then looking into professors' office hours. I think at the college level, what's really cool is you have the ability to kind of form a relationship with your professors. And for me, going through undergrad and graduate school, I found that my hardest classes, if I went and talked to a professor and showed that I wanted to be there and I was wanting to do well, they invested in me too, and they wanted me to do well as well. So I think that's a big thing. Also, there's usually kind of student service centers or different places like that on universities where they might offer tutoring. Sometimes college students can qualify for extra accommodations if needed, if they cognitively have that need, or if they have some emotional or behavioral difficulties where maybe they need to take an exam in a separate room. Maybe they get really anxious taking the test with everybody else. So I think there's different ways that you can kind of break that apart and tackle each thing separately to kind of come up with a plan to make it seem more manageable.
Great advice. Thank you, both of you. It actually, Dr. Yeager and I were talking a little bit before, and it's funny because we kind of all know that the last few years have been tumultuous, to say the least. And we all know we all should probably slow down, right? And not think we have to jump back in and be top notch and perfectionist and go back to the level that we were prior to the pandemic and everything else. But when we say that to ourselves, it kind of doesn't register. Like, yeah, we know that's true, but we keep doing it anyways. And so Dr. Yeager was kind of sharing with me just the emphasis on that and being careful with yourself and recognizing and acknowledging that we have all been through collective trauma. But when it comes from someone like them, right, we hear it differently. So I would almost offer the opportunity to say to the group kind of what you shared with me, because it just rings differently coming from the professionals.
Yeah, it's hard. And the college student, acknowledging to that college student that transition is difficult. It's so hard when they go off to college and it's not like it was in high school. And it's hard when you're going back to work, or if you're in work environment, it's hard keeping things going. And this is a really important time to be gentle with yourself and to say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this exactly the way that I used to do it. That's not good or bad, it just is. It's not something to beat yourself up over. It's not something to blame yourself for. But it is a matter of tackling. I love what you said about tackling every little bit of the fear, a little bit at a time, because that's how we get successes.
And Dr. Koterba, I want you to speak specifically about some of the work you're doing, but just as a follow-up to that, right? Like in my head, I need a timeline. So like, how soon are we going to be back to full functioning speed, right? Like what are we going through and when are we going to be done with it? Any suggestions?
It's funny because my mom felt that way. And so she was like, and she was feeling that way with the pandemic. And she's like, I'm just going to come up with a day that I think is going to end. And so she came up with like this past January. So leading up to that, we'd be complaining about it. We would have this joke back and forth. We'd be like, oh, we don't have that much longer to go. We've only got another month or two and this is all going to be over. And in a way, like that kind of like brought some humor and some levity to the situation. And we both knew like, this is going to be going on for a long time, but it was kind of helpful to have that like fake timeline in our head. So finding a way, I think, to introduce some positivity and humor, I think helps too.
You're not giving me a date. No. I guess collective trauma, right? How long does that take? I don't know. Did you have a question, Larry?
So over the last 2 years, we've been through this just awful trauma. What are the maybe 2 or 3 things that an individual can do to improve their health?
I'll repeat that just for the virtual audience. 2 to 3 things that an individual can do to improve their mental health. Is that the question? Yeah.
And based on being in the and
Based on 2 to 3 years of what we've just been through, pretty specifically.
I can start.
I'm looking at you.
Okay. For the first thing that I really want to emphasize is thinking about what you're telling yourself about where you are and where you should be or need to be. And the word should always comes with the connotation that I'm not where I need to be economically or, professionally or whatever. If you're asking for an end date for the pandemic, I'm going to say probably never. I think COVID is always going to be with us in varying degrees, hopefully a progressive lesser degree as we move on. But I think that, this is a process, not an event. And understanding that processes require incremental investments of your time and energy. And also understanding that you don't have to do this alone. That there are people around you that you care about, that care about you, that are just as invested in seeing you succeed as you are seeing them succeed. And the very last thing I would say is, in the midst of all of this, along with adding levity to it, try to have fun. We're coming back online. There are some things out there you can do that are fun now. And we've missed having fun. And get back in and find something that you really want to do. If it's going to a concert or if it's going hiking, whatever it is that you are comfortable with doing that brings joy to your world. We haven't had a lot of time to think about joy and awe and love and acceptance during this pandemic. And the more you can bring those kind of thoughts about yourself are great. With the idea of awe, I was out west and got to see the big sky that I had never seen in my life. And that is awe-inspiring. When you look at all of those stars and realize just how small you are. That was a fabulous experience. So think about how you care for yourself.
I also think checking in with yourself and thinking about how your mind and your body are feeling. I am a big fan of deep breathing because I think it's a very easy way to help calm some anxiety and some nerves and reduce tension. And I am a very big believer and talk to families and patients all the time about the connection between what's going on in your mind and how your body is feeling. And so I think it's really good to kind of have those check-ins. With me, with having 2 young kids, there's a lot of times I just kind of have to take a deep breath and then have the ability to deal with whatever, mess they're creating. And so I think that that's a really helpful thing to do. And it's really easy to do. If you're sitting in traffic and you're getting really stressed and you're tense and, that doesn't make you feel good. And so taking a deep breath in that moment, feeling your body just kind of relax is going to help your mind to relax too.
I like that. It's the checking in with ourselves, prioritizing our health. Sometimes we're just going with the flow. It's what is my list today? What do I have to do for other people? On and on and on. And we're not really feeling how we're feeling, and we're distracting with TV, we're distracting with our phones. And sometimes it's too late because we've been ignoring some signs. And sometimes I think we need to spend time with ourselves and kind of do that check, what am I feeling? How am I doing? Is there something I'm neglecting in my life that I need to build up and making sure to be intentional to do it? Because sometimes we aren't, and that's when we get into, I think, a lot more trouble.
And what about the connection between the body, as you mentioned, and the mind, and the power of exercise? What do each of you think about? And it doesn't have to be, vigorous, but just movement. How important is that?
I think, so when I think about the kind of mind-body connection, I think we forget how our brain controls everything in our body, controls every sensation. If you feel pain, it's your brain telling you that you're in pain. And I think that in our culture, there's a big disconnect between the mind and the body, but they're so closely connected. And a lot of times, just like what we're talking about, if you can change the way you're thinking about things, it can change the way that you feel. And so I think that that is a really important thing to recognize. And I think one of the things that's been really hard during the pandemic, and I see a lot in kids, is a lot of deconditioning. And so what that means is that you're not used to the same level of activity, and that could be cognitive or mental activity. You know, school hours were much shorter when school was virtual. And so they didn't have to do kind of as much of that mental activity, and then physical activity as well. You know, sports were canceled. You couldn't go to the gym. It was really hard to kind of get out and do anything. And so I think what we're seeing, we can see it in the numbers, right? There's a huge increase in mental health issues. And I think a big part of that is because of the ways that our activity has been restricted. I think physical activity of any level, like you said, whether it's, you know, vigorous exercise or just getting out and moving, is really great. And I think that what I'm seeing clinically with some of the patients that I'm working with, especially those who come in with some long COVID-like symptoms, is that they just haven't been doing a lot lately. And so then when they try to do anything, it's very strenuous and it's very exhausting. And so I think it's important to be continuing to do, even if it's just a little bit, to kind of keep that stamina up, whether it's, again, kind of mental activity or physical activity.
When I talk to my patients, I say, you know, there's like 5 buckets of things that I like for us to think about. And sometimes I say, we're not going to do all 5 today, but one is, are we eating balanced, right? Are we fueling our bodies in that way? Are we getting enough physical activity? That can be walking, moving our bodies in some way. Are we socializing and talking to people enough? Are we getting enough success, right? Because sometimes, you know, with the pandemic, you know, people talk about wearing their pajamas all the time, just weren't leaving the house, you know, change your shirt, but nothing else. But sometimes we're not getting enough success, enough check marks in our day. So how can we build those in to feel better, to feel good? How are we sleeping, right? I think I talk to almost all my patients about good sleep hygiene, because no one's sleeping and they forget that we need, you know, a lot of kids, they need more than 8 hours, they need 9 to 10 hours, and talking about why 4 hours is not enough and how that can make us grouchier. And so sometimes it's just checking off the boxes. Which ones are we doing? Which ones are we not doing? Which ones can we work on? Maybe just small goals for yourself to help you feel good. And so sometimes it's just like, here's some buckets that I know can help us. I'm not saying we're going to do all of them today, but what's one that we can start just moving in? And physical activity is one of those things too.
So every once in a while, the academic journals come out with something astounding. And yesterday, Cardiology came out. There was an article that came out that talked about optimal steps levels to shoot for a day. And the number was 7,000 steps. That's not very many. It's not many at all. I typically get 15, 16, 17,000 steps a day. And so it really gives a lot of, you know, hope and momentum to, oh, I can hit that goal. I can do 7,000 steps. Holy cow. And there were lots of things in the article that are listed out with heart strength and pulmonary function, optimal functioning. So, you know, think about, this is a realistic thing I can do. And movement is so important because it's what keeps your brain going as well.
Yes, I think that's so important, right? We think it's just, oh yeah, we got to do it, but it's tangibly connected to our brain, and understanding that psychologically and the biology of it, I think really matters. Dr. Koterba, you work with acquired conditions. Could you talk a little bit about MISC?
Yes, so I kind of started off my career primarily working with kids with acquired forms of brain injury, which I still do a lot of. But when COVID started, I kind of found a unique niche for myself, and that's working with kids who have COVID, and that could be more severe forms of COVID. So MISC is a syndrome that leads to inflammation in multiple parts of the body, and that can happen after kids get COVID. So typically the course, what happens is a child will get COVID, their symptoms might be very minimal. I've seen kids where they were just kind of mildly sick for a few days, missed school, then recovered, went back to school, back to their normal activity level, and then about a month later got sick again. And typically parents and even physicians will think, okay, well, maybe it's a flu, maybe they got, you know, COVID again, maybe it's just a virus. But over the course of, kind of a few days, it just gets worse and worse and worse. It's associated with a very high fever that's hard to control with medication. It leads to redness of the eyes and a rash, which I feel like are kind of those three things are kind of the most visible, but then also leads to, like I said, inflammation of multiple organ systems. It's incredibly rare. Since the pandemic started at Nationwide Children's, we've seen, I think, 154 kids with MIS-C. So very, very rare. And chances are, for these kids that get it, or kids that have symptoms after COVID, it's not MIS-C. And these kids are brought into the hospital because they are very sick, and they're usually there for a week or two and treated with different forms of medication, and then monitored for their heart and lung function. And then usually they're discharged back to home. And what my role is to meet with them while they're in the hospital and set positive expectations for recovery. And that's a big thing that I like to do in general when I work with kids who have had COVID. What I will say is, I want this to be a bump in the road for you. I want you to look back in 5 years and say, remember that time I was in the hospital and I was really sick? That was crazy. But now I'm getting ready to go, compete at the basketball semifinals. And so I don't want this to be something that is a life-altering thing for kids or for adults. Really, it's something that happened and then you get better from. And what we're seeing clinically is that even though these kids with MIS-C are very sick, they're not the ones that are coming in with the kind of persistent long COVID symptoms. That's kind of a different population of kids. And I can talk a little bit about what those kids tend to look like, because I think people are interested in that. But usually those kids are coming in with chronic fatigue and some kind of brain fog, confusion, maybe attention problems, a lot of chronic pain. And like I mentioned before, usually these kids have totally pulled back and withdrawn from all activities and from school and from socialization. And just like Whitney was saying, those kind of 5 buckets are all empty. They aren't sleeping very well, they're not eating very well, and they're not doing their kind of activity and socializing. And just like we've been talking about, the effects of stress from the pandemic, we're all feeling that, and it can be manifested in different ways in our body. So that mind-body connection, again, is so closely linked, where if we're not feeling well, we're not filling up those 5 buckets. If we're not filling up those 5 buckets, we're not feeling well. And so it just creates this kind of vicious cycle that we see. And really what we focus on is that return to functioning, and again, setting positive expectations for recovery. So you're going to get better. We're going to help you to get there. And we're going to take these baby steps to get better and better and better until you get back to that level of functioning.
Mm-hmm. You gave me an analogy that really helped me kind of understand what you just said, because in many cases, these kids are feeling something, true, right?
Yep.
And you talked about a car alarm analogy. Could you share that?
Yeah, so one of my colleagues actually shared this with me, and I loved it. And it really kind of is a good way of explaining the mind-body connection, I think, for non-psychologists, because it can be kind of hard to really understand that. And a lot of people have chronic pain, right? So there's different reasons why people might experience chronic pain, and typically things like stress and anxiety can make that pain feel worse. It doesn't mean that the pain is not there, but sometimes we can't find a physiological cause for the pain. It doesn't mean that it's all in your head, but what it means is that there's a disconnect somewhere. And so what my colleague had said was, it's almost like you have your, imagine a car alarm, right? So you have your remote for your car, and if you push the button, the car alarm goes off. Well, that's a good connection, right? The car alarm is working to control the car. But sometimes you go into a parking lot and there's nobody around a car and the alarm is just blasting. And that can happen sometimes for us with the ways that our bodies can manifest stress physically. So some people have pain or, other types of physical symptoms that are very real symptoms, but it's almost like there's a disconnection. Their brain is sending the wrong signal that they are in pain when there's no kind of physical cause for the pain. If you break your leg, you feel pain because you broke your leg. Some people feel pain in their leg, even if there's been no injury to that leg or that part of the body. So I like that car alarm example as a way of kind of thinking about how sometimes our brain and our body can kind of get disconnected, and our brain is sending signals to feel a certain way that may not be there. And like we're talking about, the brain is so powerful and your thoughts are so powerful that if you can work on kind of training those thoughts, it could, for some people, help to control those physical symptoms, or at least make them a little bit better.
I'm just gonna pause for any questions.
You mentioned that movement is, all of you mentioned that movement can be an important part of how you relieve stress. But it seems to me there's an issue of where you move. So during the pandemic, I couldn't go to the gym. I went to the parks. I went to the metro parks, and I was shocked to find all inspiring things in nature that I think healed me, to the point that my doctor said I had actually added years to my life by being outside. So I want you guys to talk to us about, because I'm talking to the school system and the Metro Park people about how can we get kids in nature on a regular basis so that some of that stress that they have, the time they're in nature, they don't see it or feel it.
I agree. Like, I think oftentimes when the kids come to us in the office, we're talking about, we really want you to get physical activity every single day. And how can we practice that? Sometimes we give them jump ropes and we give them frisbees and we try to give them tangible things so they're out there and they're moving their bodies. And sometimes, when you're deconditioned, you try to do exercise and you remember what you used to be. And so you try to do that and you feel bad because, so sometimes you don't have to go back to exactly where you used to be. Just getting out there can be really, really helpful. And I think for some kids, it's easier than other kids, depending on the neighborhoods that they live and the safety of them. But I do think, a lot of people are trying to work to find programs so that kids can get out more, because I agree with you. We need sunlight. We need, because that helps sleep too. We need lots of different ingredients and trying to make sure we're giving them, because now I think electronics took over our life for a while there in such a big way. And so trying to get back to the basics, I think is really important, and thinking about how to help kids problem solve. Because they'll be like, well, I don't know what to do. And so sometimes you say, okay, let's all think, let's all brainstorm together. What are some things that you might want to do? And then, okay, what barrier might get in that way? And then we kind of problem solve those barriers so we can do those things and we can get out and get the support for those things.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you're doing. And I think it's so important to encourage play for kids and encourage being outside and being a kid. I mean, our kids have had to grow up really, really fast and hear and learn about a lot of things that were very scary for us as adults, and it's continuing. So, and I think one of the things I really like that you said is brainstorming with kids and come up with activities and creating programs for kids that are structured. Because I think there's this tendency as, parents and caregivers to say, just turn off the TV and go play outside. Well, if your kids, we've had a very slow start to the spring, I feel like, and we're coming off of a couple of years and spending a lot of time inside, and so your kids might not know what to do if they're not watching TV or playing on your phone, as my kids are often doing. And so as a parent, I often push myself to say, let's come up with an activity. If I'm going to say no TV or no tablet or whatever, I want to replace that with something that they can do that is going to be fun and engaging and interactive. I think no matter how old the kid is, as an adult, spending time with them, especially incorporating it, being outside, having that physical activity and all the benefits we're talking about with that, but then having that really great interaction with, a loving and supportive caregiver. Again, kids of all ages love that. And so I think that's a great way to kind of tie all those things together.
I think the metro parks are a wonderful gift to us. And, when we're looking at all of the technology and all of the messages that it's bringing to us, the world's out of control. Nature is a great place to reground yourself. You can see the trees coming up. You can see the blooms. You can watch the birds coming back. I don't know about you, but I get up, walk every morning, and I love hearing the birds in the morning. There's something very calming in that to me, watching the sun come up. There's something very healing and very reassuring that, despite all of the craziness that's going on around us, when I'm out here in the morning, it's safe, it's healthy, and anytime that I can get sun is a good thing. And I just applaud your efforts to get out there and enjoy the right thing to take care of yourself. And the benefit is adding years to your life.
And I think what's nice too is kind of what you both are describing is that when you are in an environment like that, it is taking your brain away from your to-do list and your stresses and all these things that are usually swirling around in our heads of things we have to do. And I should be doing this and I'm making dinner, but I'm going to hop on this call at the same time. And it really forces you in almost like a meditation type of way of disconnecting from all of those other things and focusing your mind on nature and what you're seeing and your senses and feeling and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's great. And I love the thought of getting that started for kids at an early age to build those habits.
Yes, amen for nature. We all need to be out every day, right? If you could write a prescription, right? What would you put? With nature definitely would be a part of it. I was telling someone about this event and they said, please ask this question for me. What is with the brain fog? Like, and I don't know that it's even necessarily related to COVID, but just stress and anxiety and all that. Like, is it from your neurology and brain expert people? What's with the brain fog?
So it's interesting because I got an email this morning to get on a call at NCH, and we were talking about long COVID with a group of pediatricians. And the brain fog, first of all, I will say there's a lot of varying definitions for what long COVID is, and there's a lot of different names for it. And it is somewhat, I think, of a controversial diagnosis for a lot of different reasons or kind of label. But the brain fog is a big symptom that people report feeling. And I think that we don't know a lot about the, kind of the mechanism of COVID or what is causing some people to experience longer term symptoms, if it's related to possible inflammation that's caused by the virus or not. But I've seen kids who've never had a positive COVID test, but are having these symptoms. And when we look at studies that are showing comparisons between people who've had known COVID and people who did not have COVID, they're still having a lot of the same symptoms. And so what that tells me is that there's other underlying maybe causes that are perpetuating or maintaining these symptoms. And I think that stress, anxiety can be big ones. If you've ever been in a situation where you're really stressed about something. The example that I can always think of for myself is in grad school, I had to take a big neuroanatomy exam and I had studied a ton and I got there and I was so nervous. I could not remember a single thing. And I had been teaching kids deep breathing, but not really believing that it worked. And so I was like, all right, I have no other thing I can do right now. I'm going to try this thing that I teach kids to do. And it worked. And once I was able to manage that anxiety, the information was there. The information I had learned, I could access it. And so I think that anxiety piece, whether it's chronic anxiety or kind of situational, it almost is like, I imagine it like a theater curtain coming down. And then all the stuff that's in your brain, you can't see it, you can't get to it because that anxiety is in the way of that. And I think that's kind of what people may experience when they talk about brain fog. But I think the other thing, just like Whitney was saying, just talking to kids who are getting 4 hours of sleep. If you're getting 4 hours of sleep regularly, and for anybody who's had young kids, you can function, right? You can function on very little sleep, but you are not at 100%. I mean, when I was sleep training my 2 kids, I felt like a zombie. That's brain fog. And I had a clear reason why. I knew I wasn't sleeping at night. So it was clear to me why that was happening. But I think for people that are experiencing symptoms of long COVID and you see it in the media and it's this big scary thing and who knows when it's going to end and inflammation and all these other things, it gives you a different cause to tie that to, and you might not be looking. Again, I love these 5 buckets. These 5 buckets are going to impact your neurological functioning and your ability to be kind of cognitively at your best. So is there a physiological cause? I don't think that we know that yet, but we do know that there's a lot of other factors that can drive kind of cognitive functioning and just how you're feeling overall.
And those 5 buckets then, for recap: 1, balanced eating; 2, physical activity; 3, socializing; 4, getting enough successes; and 5, sleeping. Is that right? Okay. We're going to share those. That's good. Okay. So also from the Genius Brain people, what about tech? Like, we're all using tech. Our kids are probably using too much tech, but what do you have to say about it all? Kids and tech. Social media and everything that comes along.
I will first say my I get very upset when I see the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines and recommendations for technology in kids, because it makes me feel like a terrible parent. And I am a neuropsychologist, and I know how to tell other people what to do with their kids, but not usually with my own. And so it's just so hard right now. I mean, this is like survival mode. You know, if you have kids of any age at home and you're trying to work from home, I think first of all, just getting rid of that parent or caregiver guilt that we all feel, and just knowing like, this is what I have to do right now in this time. And I'm going to take advantage of the other times when maybe I have time to spend with my kids, but I have to get on this important call right now. My 2-year-old is going to be on my phone. My 4-year-old is going to be playing Wii. Like, that is just a reality of what we have. Research shows that there are detrimental effects of too much technology with young kids and developing brains. But I think, one, it is what it is right now. And two, if there's ways that you can still interact with your kids while they are maybe watching TV, you know, so instead of just passively sitting and having the TV on, saying, hey, let's sit down and watch this show together. What is Bluey doing right there? That's so silly. Why do you think he did that? So I think that there's ways that can be kind of interactive as well. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'm sure this comes up all the time for you.
It does, because I think, you know, we have recommendations out there, but we know our world is so technology focused. There's so much happening on the computer at school, and then their friends are on this game, and how they're gonna play with their friends if they're all in the game, and I can't be on the game. And so it's hard to set limits. But I do think that it is important to have boundaries, right? There's time when you say, yes, this is the amount of time you have each day on the game or on the phone, and then there's times when you don't have it. And I also think we have to sometimes see warning signs when it is too much. You know, sometimes I have lots of conversations about kids getting angry, and there being a lot of disruptive behavior about turning the game off. And I think that's a sign that maybe we've gone too far with this, and we're not able to control our emotions about being able to turn it off. And so being able to say, you know, we have clear boundaries about when we use the game and how we use the game or the electronics, and when we turn it off as a family. Because if you don't have those rules in place, you can easily all get on your devices and not talk to each other and not communicate, and that becomes your only thing that you want to do. And so I think it's really important to also monitor how long your kid is on the device, because sometimes you don't realize until someone says like, how long? And then you start to actually add it up, and then you're like, well, my 3-year-old's on the device 8 hours. That might be a little too much, right? It's a lot too much, right? But you might not notice it when you too are on your device. Like if I had to like have someone show me how much I'm on my device, oh my goodness, I actually don't want to know what that number is, right? So it's also being very not like taking stock, right? How much time am I on this? Do I really want that to be all of my time? And then making sure to have a clear boundary so it doesn't consume you. And you use it appropriately. There's times you need them to be on the device. You have to do something, but make sure it's not the whole day. And then get some of your individual.
I think the other thing that you mentioned too that I want to highlight is, as adults, making sure that we are setting that good example. So if you're telling a child that you need to no tablet time now, but then you're sitting there scrolling on your phone, and like, I am totally 100% guilty of this. So no judgment. But I think that, again, it kind of goes back to that. If you're going to tell your child no more electronics, you got to give them an alternative. And I think also setting that example of like, you know, there's times that we have to be on our computer or our phone, but then there's times we don't need to be. So recognizing that difference there. And I also think that screen time can be an excellent tool for motivating kids. And if you have limits set, then you can also expand those limits as a reward. So if for good behavior, maybe you say, okay, you have to come home and get your homework done. If you get your homework done by this time, you get 15 extra minutes on your tablet tonight. You know, so I think that if you have limits set, it can end up being beneficial to you as a caregiver, because it gives you some leverage. It gives you some bargaining, you know, power to be able to kind of play with it.
Yeah, I really like that. The idea of using it as an opportunity to teach, you know, because if you go to tech to cope with different things, you know, as individuals age, we find other ways to cope that are maladaptive. You know, so you might cope by eating the 15th donut. You might cope by, you know, having the 23rd cup of coffee, or, you know, or the 15th beer, or whatever it takes. And this is an opportunity to talk to kids about, you know what, there are a lot of ways to cope. And it's not all online, it's not all this, it's not all the other thing. And I actually set my phone so that I get a report at the end of the day. How many times did I pick my phone up in an hour? And the average for me is 26 times. And it's way too much. It is way too much, but I'll find myself reaching for the phone when it's not doing anything. Just to see, oh my God, did I miss something? You know, and we do that, and we, you know, I think it's an opportunity, like you had said, to share with your kids that I'm guilty of this too.
Yeah, I've heard of some families having like a charging station, like a family charging station where everybody puts their phone there. And then it's funny because I've had parents say like, well, I can't do that though, because I use my phone to get up in the morning. And it's like, well, you could have an alarm clock, you know? So I think that there's, you know, little things like that, that again, set that really nice example, because technology can also really interfere with sleep. The blue light that comes from our electronics kind of tells our brain, stay awake, and really exciting things are happening. Stimulating things are happening when you're on your phone or on a device. That also tells your brain like it is not time to sleep. So again, setting that good example for kids of removing technology before bed, I think is also really helpful.
Dr. Yeager, is there anything you would comment on just resilience? I know this is the work you do with STAR. Is there anything you would want to share just related to that and the work you're doing?
So the single factor that I want everyone to walk away with is that we're all born to be resilient. We're hardwired to see the negative. It's tied to survival of the species. So we're all hardwired to see the negative, but we're also able to be resilient, and we're hardwired to be resilient. The negative screams at us, the positive only whispers. So you've really got to listen hard for the positive, and you can train yourself to see the positive, and you can see yourself to build resilience. And oftentimes resilience is in what you do outside of yourself, more so than what you do with yourself. So when you're thinking about being more resilient, think about what you do outside of yourself. And maybe it's as simple as getting yourself outside and noticing what's going on around you in the world and giving to somebody else. Because we all have the capability. We're all hardwired to be resilient. We just have to work a little bit harder at it. And maybe we need to turn the volume down on those negative things.
Let me just clarify. You said the negative screams, but the positive only whispers. Was that right? That's a quote. We're going to use that. It's so true. It's really great.
Feel free.
We'll credit you, of course. I guess along those same lines, ladies as well. You know, what would you say to family members, community leaders, parents, right? What is the most important thing we can be doing for ourselves and for our families and friends?
I really liked how he talked about paying attention to the positive. With my patients, I often use this example. You know, there's an arcade game where the moles pop up, right? They automatically pop up. And then our job is to push them down, hammer them down. The negative is the mole. The negative are just popping up on you constantly. They make you worry, they make you doubt yourself. Like you see those positives. And the only way to really move forward is you gotta push it down. You gotta challenge it with something. You gotta notice something positive. You have to do something positive. And so sometimes it's practicing that challenge of that mole, right? Hammering it down a little bit. So noticing the positive that's going on around you. And then, you know, we need to praise people more often. You know, like acknowledge what people are doing. Tell that person that you really appreciated how amazing that Starbucks drink was that they made for you. Or the fact that they bagged your groceries. Or, you know, because so many people are working short staffed and long hours and like they're drained. And sometimes we need to hear positive things from ourselves, but also from other people. And so when I find that when you praise someone, their whole body changes, right? And so being intentional to acknowledge the positive around us so that we can feel people up too. Pass it on.
Yeah, I love that. I've started getting like $5 Starbucks gift cards, and I have some really awesome support staff that I couldn't do my job without. And when they go above and beyond and kind of do something extra, I'll put one with a little thank you note in their mailbox. And you know, it's a little thing. It's probably 1.5 Starbucks drinks, but they're always so appreciative. And it is taking that, you know, whether it's having a kind of tangible thing like that, or taking that extra time to say, hey, I really appreciate you. And I appreciate what you're doing to, you know, help me in this job, or, you know, whatever the case might be, because it makes you feel good and it makes them feel good.
My husband cleaned the kitchen one day for me. And it took so much stress off me. I had to text him 3 times. You cleaned that kitchen. Oh my goodness, that felt so good. And he texted me back, it felt good for you to acknowledge that I did that for you, right? So sometimes like we're like, okay, you cleaned the kitchen, but you don't even acknowledge, but he did that. He had to stay up because he was on call, he's a physician. He stayed up to do it for me, right? So it's acknowledging and then doing it when the other person needs it, or when your kid does it. So sometimes we're like, well, that's what they're supposed to do, but they need to hear you say it, right? It's so important.
Yeah, it's so funny because I actually did the same thing. My husband had cleaned the kitchen a couple nights, and I texted him and I was like, I just want you to know I really appreciate you. And he was like, what? what is this text? But I think that just speaks to like how we don't do that. We think about it, but we don't always come right out and say it. And so I think getting in that habit and labeling praise, I think with kids especially, is really important. I think we fall into the trap of saying, you're so smart. You know, but you can't change how smart you are. You're either smart or you're not smart. What you can change is how hard you work. And so I like to really recognize that with kids. You worked so hard, and look at this, you built this because you worked so hard. This is so awesome. You know, the more you praise kids, adults, anyone, the more attention you give to that positive, the more you're going to see from it. And again, I feel like it pays dividends.
That was awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to give another opportunity for questions. Uh-huh.
And I studied why everybody, I've talked really loud. The study was, why are so many school-age kids experiencing so much anxiety? And they studied after 9/11 why just immeasurably the anxiety went up in kids. And they took a look at the fact of social media. When you experience something stressful, your cortisol levels in your body go up. So when you experience it over and over and over again on TV, we see the images of the war and COVID. Our brains, especially young brains that can't understand what they're seeing, it's the same image, but their brain is experiencing that stressor over and over again. So it's almost like 15 times that day they had that stressor because of the stress hormone that's released. So that's another strike against social media in the news, I guess.
It's the impact of vicarious trauma. And we have to protect against that. We have to acknowledge that it's real. I don't know about you, but when I hear a jet fly over loud and low, I still look up. And I'm teaching medical students now, and I mentioned 9/11, and they're like, yeah, I read about that in history. You know, their traumas are different than that. They're mass shootings or whatever.
Our kids are hiding under their desks for shooting drills.
Yeah, we're teaching them that. So we equally have to take the responsibility to teach them that there's an opposite reaction to that, and you have to put up against that so that you're not producing cortisol, something that produces positive releases of neurochemicals, random reinforcement. I love the Starbucks cards. It's amazing what a graduate student will do for a Starbucks card. It really is. But random reinforcement is so important for kids to help them find the positive. And that's a gift that we all as adults have to share with our children. And we all have to be aware that the images that they are seeing of Ukraine are real. And they may not have a frame of reference for that, so we have to give them that frame of reference. And that's over there, and it doesn't mean it's going to come over here. Yes, it could, but it doesn't need to. And I actually was talking to an adolescent the other day that was really angry at sanctions. What do sanctions do? We should attack. And there was no idea, there was no history of what NATO was, where NATO came from, why sanctions work, how sanctions happen. And if they don't have a frame of reference to put it against, it feels to them like we're doing nothing. So again, it's important for us as we have that to share it and to teach it. And that this is not something that's just random. This came out of something that was actually a lot more horrific than this. We just didn't have it piped into our living rooms or onto our phones.
I think, yeah.
I think with everything that you're talking about, it really stands out for me, you know, when we're talking about the future, the fact that we're gonna live with these kinds of things in the world, and our future generations are gonna live with these things. You know, it's kind of, it stands out to me, like, we really have to start working on solutions. We have to get the medical professionals to work with the educational professionals and come up with standardized programs for our young people, right? Because if we don't start teaching those things at a younger age, they don't have the toolkit, they don't have the skills to navigate the world. I mean, you know, how did we get what we're teaching today? Why did we require it? Why are we still teaching the same things? Why are we not teaching life skills? Why are we not teaching how to balance a checkbook before you get out of high school? And who even carries a checkbook anymore? I damn myself by saying that, but I mean, you know what I'm saying. I mean, there are things that we're going through in the education system, and how important are those things related to life skills that our young people really need in today's world?
Okay, I was just gonna call out, Nationwide Children's kind of the global, I don't know if you'd say global, but at least national mental health campaign called On Our Sleeves. And they are doing a lot to partner with schools around the country, so not just here in Ohio. And that is kind of one of their big initiatives, is kind of more of that widespread. You know, what we do is more on an individual level, and what On Our Sleeves is doing is really more on a much larger scale, where they're working with teachers and with schools to find out, just like what you're talking about, you know, what is the impact? I mean, I think we just got an email this morning about this, and some of our colleagues that are involved in this work, you know, what is the impact of these mental health issues on educating kids, and then what are ways that we as mental health professionals can help address that on a large scale?
I agree with you. I did the Nationwide Children's provided a walk. It was right up over here, and again, we live in a community where we have great access, right, to education and awareness, but not all communities have that. And so access is the piece that can be missing, and where people can miss out just because of where they live, where they grew up. And so I think those things, I just like pushing that like at a national level, state level, and national level, you know, getting with the people who are making those decisions for these kids. It's required to visit your national park, your metro park. It's required to go to a national monument. You know, if you take kids to Washington, D.C., but we have all these resources right around our corner in front of them, and some of our kids have never been there.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on my soapbox for just 1 minute. I listened to the Surgeon General talk about the mental health crisis in the United States. And as a person who's ending my 30th year working in mental health, I will say to you that when I started in mental health, the state budget 16% went to mental health. This year it's less than 0.5%. Over the last 30 years, 50% of the addiction treatment centers in the United States have closed. 50% of the mental health facilities have closed. Why? Because insurance companies will only pay for medically necessity-driven mental health and addiction services. So while we lost 1,100 people to COVID, we lost 1,000 people last month to the opiate epidemic. Why? Because they don't have access to the treatments they need. So this is a system that has been neglected for 30 years. And it's not, or should not be, a surprise to any of us that we have a mental health crisis right now. And we don't have access for the children who need the help that they need. We don't have access for the adolescents that are experiencing suicidal thoughts for the care they need. We don't have access for the opiate addicts to get into the kind of treatment that they need. It's just not here because the system is deteriorated to that point. So I don't work for the Adam board. I'm not a part of the Adam board, but you know, if you're voting, please vote for the mental health support stuff.
May I add something? As a retired pediatrician who's worked at Children's Hospital for 45 years, in 2004, we had 3 child psychiatrists at Children's. Now we have 30. And the wait time now is much worse. It's a year for somebody who does not have a life-threatening psychiatric mental health condition. If it's an attempted suicide, they get seen quickly. If it's anxiety, if it's psychiatry for some other reasons associated with anxiety, it's about a year. The stress, and this is Columbus, Ohio. We have probably per capita the largest number, one of the largest numbers of child psychiatrists in the country. We have a small number of private practice child psychiatrists as well, correct me if I'm wrong. And we can't meet the need. Think of the rest of the country. And think of the rest of the culture. And we have a lot of psychologists. I don't know what the wait time is now. It's probably about 4 to 6 months. So we have a lot here that we don't. And so it's a very, very challenging situation. And I'd like to add about the American Academy of Pediatrics requirement, the guidelines, they're not required, guidelines for
Thank goodness.
time on the devices. And yeah, they're a little more stringent. And I wonder if we get out of this COVID epidemic, if that may affect that. I don't know that.
I was wondering that too. Yeah,
I don't know what's going to happen with that, but boy, our world has changed. And I will tell you, when I trained in pediatrics in Cincinnati, that's a long time ago, and we had no training in mental health, emotional health. I know how to take care of kids with leukemia, chronic kidney disease, etc., but mental health, zippo. Now there's a fair amount. It's improved a lot. So the world has changed.
A lot of great things with technology, but it's all detrimental to our kids in particular. I worked with, I don't know how many that got into a business where you have to look at people and talk to them, and they would hide in the office because they don't want to look at anyone's face. They don't want to talk to them. And they would sit on their phone all day long. They just want to text people. They don't want to interact. And families where each kid, 5 kids, all in their own bedrooms, parents are in their bedroom, and nobody is talking. They're all hooked up to the computer, the laptop, and the phone. So anything that can be done in that area of pulling back, you can't like maybe overnight, but gradually pull back their time. I had a girlfriend that they could only be on that computer when she was sitting there with them, and it was in lockdown. That's another way to pull it. Sending them to their room is not a punishment. They've got all their toys and they love it. And who gives it to them? So, and also about how they think and how they feel. You can't ask them that question and then keep talking because you're never going to find out. And they know you don't see them or hear them. And I'll shut up.
We gotta make family time fun.
Yep.
Remember how to do that.
Thank you, all of you, so much for your input. Any last parting words? We covered a lot of ground. Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to share some resources. I see Sarah just left, but Sharon, I know you're back there. We have some great local resources here in the community to address some of the needs of our local community. As we noted on our sleeves, of course, is a tremendous resource. The website has a lot of information there and packaged programs for schools and communities and parents. The CDC also has some great resources on their website. We have some on our website as well. We now have I want to give Sharon a quick second to talk about the Wellbeing Connection as well. But upstairs at Ohio State, we just brought in 13 new mental and behavioral health practitioners, primarily for adults, but they will see people age 15 and up. So if you're interested in those resources, just let me know, let us know, we can connect you to them. They're upstairs in our building and actively working. And also we have a great connection group here at Healthy New Albany called Senior Connections. If you're 55 or older, one of these documents is out front. It's a great way to get involved and get engaged with a wonderful group of people. So on that note, I just want to say again, thank you. And Sharon, if you would you want to say a few words about our local resource? Wellbeing Connection is in, there's a flyer in your packet, and we'll provide some digital packets as well, but they're a tremendous community partner and they do a lot for our kids. So Sharon.
Hi, so I'm Sharon and I'm on the board of Wellbeing Connection, which is a newish nonprofit here in New Albany. And let me just say, Sarah is our public speaker, not me. So my cortisol level just went through the roof, right? But I would just say we are a nonprofit that is focused on providing free resources, support, and education around mental health. So we have a yoga class twice a month. And we have a parenting kids with special needs support group and things like that. We're doing different workshops. We're doing a LGBTQI allyship in partnership with a local church in Gahanna coming up. So there's just so many wonderful things that we're doing. So take a look at us. And I will say another great resource locally and nationally is NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness. They have amazing resources, and they're basically, I think almost all of them are free. So check that out too. And then check out wellbeingconnection.org.
Yes, thank you. There's a survey in your packet for everyone. If you could fill that out, there's a little box on the back to drop those. And we can't wait to see you again soon. I'm sorry we ran a little bit over, so I will let you all out of here. And it's just my honor for having each of you. Thank you all so much.